This story is inspired by the real case of Marie Lilienberg and Maria Wallin, 1983, California, USA. They were two young women filled with dreams, curiosity, and the kind of courage only those truly in love with the world possess. Marie Lilienberg and Maria Wallin had left behind the quiet streets of Sweden in search of something bigger, a once-in-a-lifetime adventure across the vast, unfamiliar roads of America. It was the summer of 1983, and they had their hearts set on California. Golden beaches, long highways, sunsets that seemed to last forever. But what began as an innocent journey of discovery would become one of the most haunting and unresolved tragedies of the decade. Marie was 21. Maria, 23. Friends united by their adventurous spirits, they had been planning this trip for months. America called to them like a dream. After arriving in the U.S., they traveled across several states, absorbing the experience with wide eyes and open hearts. But on July 22, 1983, everything took a dark and irreversible turn. That day, they were seen for the last time alive. Witnesses recall them hitchhiking along a stretch of highway in Redwood City, California. Their destination, Los Angeles. Nearly 500 kilometers of coastline, freedom, and uncertainty lay ahead. But they were used to meeting strangers. They trusted the road. Hitchhiking wasn't taboo back then. It was part of the experience. It was how they connected with people, how they moved, how they believed they would truly understand the country they admired from afar. They traveled light, just 2 backpacks, maps, journals, and disposable cameras to freeze their favorite memories. They wrote postcards home, cheerful, filled with joy. In one, Marie wrote to her family, "We're safe and having the time of our lives. California is more beautiful than we imagined." But behind those words was a looming danger they never saw coming. When they didn't arrive in Los Angeles, and days turned into weeks, panic began to spread across continents. Calls were made, reports filed, flyers printed. The Swedish embassy got involved. Police started an investigation, but without a single lead. The road had swallowed them whole, leaving behind no answers. Just silence. And then, almost a month later, a hiker in Los Padres National Forest made a horrifying discovery. Deep in the woods, far from any road, lay 2 decomposed bodies. Nude, brutally stabbed. One missing an arm, likely due to wild animals. The beauty of the forest contrasted sharply with the horror found within. The dreams, the laughter, the postcards, all left to rot under the California sun. The dental records confirmed it. Marie Lilienberg and Maria Wallin had been found. But the mystery was only beginning. Who picked them up that day? Why were they taken so far off route? What unspeakable horrors did they endure in their final moments? No witnesses, no suspects, no justice, only grief, and a haunting silence that still echoes through the canyons of California. The discovery of the bodies on August 18, 1983, sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. What began as a missing persons case had now turned into a brutal double homicide. The location itself, the rugged wilderness of Los Padres National Forest, was remote, isolated, and nearly impossible to reach without deliberate intent. This was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated act. Someone had taken Marie and Maria there. Someone had planned this. Investigators from the Monterey County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene, quickly realizing the level of decomposition made the autopsy challenging. The remains had been exposed to the elements for nearly a month. Scavenging animals had left their mark. One of the victims, likely Marie, was missing an arm. The bodies were found naked, with clear evidence of sexual assault. They had been stabbed repeatedly. The brutality suggested rage, or perhaps a twisted sense of control. But the hardest part wasn't identifying the cause of death. It was retracing their final steps. How had they gone from hitchhiking a busy coastal highway to ending up in a remote forest over 250 kilometers away from their last known location? The timeline was a void. There were no confirmed sightings after Redwood City. No car descriptions. No names. Nothing. Detectives began by mapping out potential routes: gas stations, rest stops, diners, anywhere they could have been seen. But 1983 wasn't an era of surveillance cameras or digital footprints. Everything relied on memory, and memories fade. Witnesses remembered two friendly European girls, laughing and chatting with strangers. But no one recalled anything unusual. No threatening individuals. No strange vehicles. Authorities released composite sketches and reached out to the media. Local and national news picked up the story. The narrative was chilling. Two young women, full of life, murdered and left to decay in the forest. The public reacted with shock and fear. Hitchhiking, once seen as a youthful rite of passage, suddenly felt dangerous. Parents warned their children. Travelers grew more cautious. The roads seemed less friendly. Back in Sweden, the news shattered two families. Mothers and fathers who had once encouraged their daughters' dreams of adventure now lived every parent's worst nightmare. The funerals were somber, with unanswered questions hanging heavy in the air. Who would do this? And why? As weeks turned into months, the case stalled. Tips trickled in, but led nowhere. The FBI briefly joined the investigation, suspecting the possible involvement of a serial killer. There were whispers. Other women had gone missing in similar circumstances. Some were found, some weren't. But there was no smoking gun, no confession, no DNA. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air, just like Marie and Maria had a month before their bodies were found. But some investigators refused to give up, and soon, their search for the truth would take a new direction. One far darker than anyone had imagined. The case might have gone cold, but evil has a way of leaving a scent. Behind the scenes, a small group of determined investigators kept digging. The pattern of the crime, abduction, remote disposal, sexual violence, stabbing, bore eerie similarities to other unsolved murders across California. And when you're chasing a ghost, patterns are everything. One name began to surface, a name spoken in hushed tones among detectives from Santa Barbara to Riverside. A man with a long rap sheet, a reputation for violence, and a chilling proximity to multiple crime scenes. His name was Loren Herzog, and he wasn't acting alone. Loren, along with his accomplice Wesley Shermantine, would later become known as the Speed Freak Killers, a nickname born from their deadly cocktail of meth-fueled violence and utter disregard for human life. But in 1983, they were still in the shadows, unknown, unproven, the stuff of backroom whispers and half-formed suspicions. Still, their names were quietly added to a growing list of potential suspects. But evidence, real evidence, was hard to come by. The technology of the time couldn't provide DNA matches the way it can today. The forest had swallowed most of the forensic clues. No murder weapon was ever found. No eyewitness placed either man with the Swedish girls. And so, the connection remained only a theory, a dark possibility that no one could prove yet. Meanwhile, the families of Marie and Maria tried to keep their daughters' memories alive. They wrote letters to senators. They campaigned for international cooperation. They begged the media not to forget. But the world moves fast, and attention fades. Other tragedies took the headlines. Other names replaced theirs in the news cycle. Still, something about their story refused to die. Perhaps it was the innocence of it all. Two bright, hopeful travelers killed for no reason. Perhaps it was the fear, the idea that someone could so easily vanish, even in broad daylight. Or maybe it was the frustration, a case with no justice, no closure, no end. In the years that followed, every lead was revisited. every report reread. Investigators traveled hundreds of miles, re-interviewed witnesses, and consulted profilers. They spoke to inmates. They followed tips from psychics. Desperation blurred the line between strategy and hope. And then came a chilling revelation. A former associate of Herzog and Shermantine came forward with a cryptic message. He claimed to know where the bodies were buried. Plural. He talked about women, forests, silence. He didn't mention names. He didn't need to. The implication was clear. The Speed Freak killers had claimed more lives than anyone dared imagine. But without physical evidence, without a confession, and without a direct link to Marie and Maria, the case remained unsolved. Investigators could feel the answers circling just out of reach, like something hiding in the trees, just beyond the light. And somewhere, perhaps, the killer, or killers, still walked free, their secrets buried deeper than any grave. Before they vanished into the wilderness, Marie and Maria left behind breadcrumbs, innocent, joyful traces of their final days, postcards mailed from San Francisco, journal entries scrawled with exclamation marks, photographs, slightly overexposed, of smiling faces against ocean backdrops. These fragments, small and fragile, would become priceless in the investigation, and devastating for their families. In one postcard, Marie had written to her younger sister, "You'd love the coast. It's all sunshine, surfers, and giant trees. We met the nicest couple today. They gave us a ride and bought us lunch. Oi dai." Investigators dissected every word, every possible clue. Who was this couple? Where did they part ways? Could this have been the moment the trap was set? The girls were known for being careful, despite their adventurous nature. They avoided hitching rides alone and usually stuck to well-traveled highways. But something, or someone, had convinced them to break that pattern. Was it charm? Deceit? A promise of safety? That postcard became a bitter artifact, a window into the precise moment when their fate may have been sealed. Back in California, detectives revisited the possibility that the girls weren't killed where they were found. The logistics of transporting two adult women over 250 kilometers into rugged forest terrain weren't simple. It suggested premeditation. It suggested experience. The killer may have known the land well, or had used it before. But here's where the story takes a darker, more disturbing turn. In the mid-1990s, Wesley Shermantine, one half of the suspected serial duo, was convicted of multiple murders. Later, his partner, Lauren Herzog, would confess under pressure to additional crimes, including a claim that he and Shermantine had hunted women during drug binges. In a chilling interview, he spoke of remote locations, buried remains, and girls who never screamed. The details weren't precise, but they were hauntingly familiar. Could Marie and Maria have been among them? Journalists began connecting the dots. They raised questions the police couldn't publicly confirm. The national forest, the time frame, the method, all bore the signature of the duo's known crimes. But without confessions tied to names, the girls remained officially unclaimed by the killer's ledger of horror. The public fascination grew. True crime magazines picked up the case. TV documentaries featured the story in grainy reenactments. But with every retelling, a new layer of pain emerged for the families. Their daughters became symbols of cautionary tales, their memories reduced to tropes of trust gone wrong. And yet, within all the media noise, one voice never stopped speaking. Maria's mother, Elizabeth. She wrote letters to the governor of California. She pushed for the case to be reopened using new forensic methods. She refused to let her daughter be forgotten. Her strength, her refusal to grieve in silence, reignited interest. Cold case units revisited the evidence. Bones found in other regions were tested. A fragment of a shoe, unearthed near an old logging road, was compared to a photo from Maria's camera roll. Every scrap of data mattered now. The trail wasn't warm. But it wasn't entirely cold either. The ghosts were still whispering, through letters, photos, memories, and someone, somewhere, knew the full truth. The California coast stretches for nearly 900 miles, dotted with cliffs, redwoods, beaches, and highways that seem to vanish into the horizon. In 1983, it was the backdrop of a generation's freedom, and, for Marie and Maria, the path that led them into darkness. But for investigators, it became something else entirely. A haunted map, scarred with markers of loss. Detectives began to overlay the known routes of other missing persons cases onto the map. Women who had disappeared between the Bay Area and Southern California, most of them young, most of them hitchhiking. In many instances, the bodies were never found, only rumors or fragments. A blouse buried in pine needles, a torn backpack washed ashore. It became clear that Marie and Maria were not the first, and tragically, they wouldn't be the last. What truly disturbed investigators was the consistency in geography. The Los Padres National Forest, where the bodies were found, had come up before, in unrelated missing persons reports. The forest was vast, dense, and silent. Roads disappeared into nothing. Cell phone signals didn't exist in 1983, and even in later years the area remained a communications dead zone. For someone hunting victims, it was perfect. In 2012, nearly 3 decades after Marie and Maria's deaths, Wesley Shermantine made a move no one expected. From death row, he offered to reveal the locations of multiple victims, for a price. He claimed there were dozens. Investigators arranged a series of excavations based on his hand-drawn maps and vague memories. And incredibly, human remains were recovered. Skulls, bones, jewelry, but none of them belonged to Marie or Maria. The press swarmed around the story. TV crews hovered outside prisons and courthouses. Podcasters picked it up. But even in the renewed frenzy, the Swedish girls remained in the margins, part of the story, but never the center. Their case was too cold, their trail too faint. Shermantine and Herzog never explicitly admitted to their murder. Still, the map continued to speak. The coordinates of the forest, the dirt paths, the forgotten picnic areas, they all told a story of routine, a ritual. And it wasn't just a place of dumping, it was a place of transformation, where vibrant lives became secrets buried under leaves and soil. Someone knew those roads well. Someone had taken women there before. That kind of knowledge didn't come from wandering, it came from repetition. For Marie and Maria's families, each year brought a cruel anniversary. They lit candles. They held moments of silence. Swedish newspapers ran occasional updates, but the pain never dulled. The maps stayed on their walls, filled with pins and dates and dashed lines. As if somewhere in that chaos of coordinates, the truth still waited to be uncovered. And then, one day, a retired detective working the case in his spare time found something unusual in an old evidence box. A photograph, time-worn and faded, showing a red vehicle in the background of a roadside photo taken by Maria, likely during one of their early stops. No one had ever identified that car, and suddenly the past wasn't done speaking. The photograph was grainy, sun-drenched, and ordinary at first glance. A candid shot of Maria standing near a signpost, grinning, wind in her hair, the ocean just beyond the highway. But in the background, half obscured by scrub brush, sat a red 2-door car. The make and model were unclear, but the shape, long hood, low profile, suggested a 1970s-era muscle car. It was the kind of vehicle people remembered. The photo had been in evidence all along, overlooked for decades. It had never been entered into any vehicle database or shown to the public. Now, with digital enhancement, the image became a potential breakthrough. Investigators circulated it discreetly among retired patrol officers, garage owners, and classic car clubs. And then a hit. A retired state trooper from the San Luis Obispo area remembered pulling over a similar car in 1983, just days after Marie and Maria disappeared. The driver? A white male in his early 30s, nervous, alone. No arrest was made, just a warning for a broken taillight. The officer remembered the car reeked of gasoline and something else, something foul. He'd written the license plate number on the back of a notepad. The note was long gone, but the memory haunted him once the murders made the news. He never came forward, assuming it was coincidence. Now, with urgency, police scoured DMV archives. The process was slow. Computers back then were limited, and paper records had been boxed and forgotten. Days turned into weeks, and then finally a registration surfaced. A red 1974 Dodge Charger, registered to a man named Harold Franklin, known locally as a recluse who lived near the forest's edge. Harold had died in 1991. A heart attack, no criminal record, no family to claim him. His property had since been abandoned, left to rot among the trees of Los Padres. Investigators visited the site. What they found there sent shivers down their spines. The home was a crumbling shell, overtaken by vines and silence. But in a back shed, locked from the inside, they discovered dozens of women's items: combs, earrings, torn pieces of fabric, and a rotting backpack with a Swedish-language travel guide inside. It was moldy, water-damaged, but unmistakable. A name, barely legible, was still inked on the inside cover: Monsieur Lilienberg. The evidence was circumstantial, too degraded for DNA, but the implications were undeniable. Someone had brought Marie and Maria here. Someone had kept souvenirs. But if Harold Franklin was the killer, he'd taken his secrets to the grave. No confessions, no accomplices, no final answer. Yet some detectives believed he hadn't acted alone. The logistics, the timing, didn't align. Was he a predator or just a host? A man who offered shelter to more dangerous men. The discovery sparked a new theory. What if Franklin's remote home had been a waypoint, a kind of underground network for traveling predators? A hidden stop along a shadowy highway of violence? It sounded far-fetched. But so did two girls vanishing without a trace in broad daylight. Back in Sweden, Maria's mother received the news of the backpack. She didn't speak. She just wept. Her daughter's adventure, once symbolized by maps and sunlight, had come full circle, ending in a dark shed beneath a canopy of trees. But the mystery wasn't over yet. Because inside that same shed, wedged beneath a loose floorboard, investigators found something else: a single roll of undeveloped film. The film roll was fragile, its outer casing rusted with time and moisture. Experts at the forensic lab handled it like ancient glass, carefully, delicately, knowing it might hold the final moments of two lives lost to the shadows. After a week of chemical restoration and precise temperature control, the first images emerged. What they revealed would shake even the most hardened investigators. The photos began innocently. Shots from San Francisco. Maria sitting on the edge of a fountain. Marie pointing at a street mural. Then, blurry trees. Road signs. A hitchhiker's view of America. But halfway through the reel, something shifted. The light changed. The images grew erratic, underexposed, and ominously framed. One photo showed the dashboard of a car. Not theirs. A red interior. A hand on the steering wheel, ringed, masculine, out of focus. Another. Marie in the passenger seat, eyes turned toward the window, not smiling. Then, the forest. Shot after shot of winding dirt roads, towering trees, fading light. Someone was documenting the drive. But why? In the second-to-last photo, Maria stands outside a small wooden structure, the same shed found decades later. Her posture is stiff, her expression unreadable. Behind her, part of a red car is visible, barely in frame. And then, the final image, a blur of green and brown. Taken accidentally, perhaps. The camera tilted, the shutter pressed during movement. It offered no answers. But it confirmed what detectives had feared. The girls were brought to that place alive. The film was dated to late July 1983, aligning perfectly with their disappearance. It placed them in Franklin's proximity. It validated the forest theory. It proved they hadn't just vanished. They'd been taken, driven, watched. And most chillingly of all, photographed. By someone who wanted to remember. The public never saw those images. Authorities decided they were too disturbing, too intimate. But behind closed doors, they changed everything. The girls weren't victims of chance. They'd been selected, followed, targeted. The red car, the isolated shed, the precise disposal of the bodies. All of it pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't an impulsive crime. It was a ritual. The discovery reopened the case officially. Cold case analysts, criminal profilers, and forensic genealogists descended on the scene with new tools. Soil samples were taken. Trace hairs recovered from a rusted mattress were tested. A partial DNA profile emerged. Male, unknown, not in the national database. But it was something. A crack in the wall. News reached Sweden swiftly. It was front-page material. For the first time in decades, there was proof. The pain didn't ease, but the not knowing began to dissolve. The girls had been brave, hopeful, and trusting. And someone had exploited that trust in the cruelest way imaginable. But questions still lingered. Was Harold Franklin the sole architect of this horror? Or just another monster in a gallery of them? And if so, who had taken those photographs? There was one more place to look for answers. Because beneath a rotted floor joist in the cabin, police discovered a locked metal box. Inside, letters. Hundreds of them. Notes, receipts, maps, and, at the very bottom, a single strip of Super 8 film. Silent. Unmarked. Waiting. The Super 8 film was brittle, oxidized by decades of damp forest air, but still intact. Investigators held their breath as they prepared it for digital transfer, a process that required slow, frame-by-frame scanning. What emerged from the reel was not a confession, not a screaming climax of truth, but something far more haunting. The footage began with harmless landscapes, trees, birds, a creek running shallow over stone. Then, a car's hood glinting in the sun. Red. A moment later, the lens turned inward. A man's face, half obscured by shadow, grainy, but visible. Strong jawline, beard, laughing. He spoke, but the film was silent. Investigators compared the image to old driver's license photos. It wasn't Harold Franklin. It was someone else. Possibly someone still alive. In the following seconds, the footage panned to the forest floor. A woman's shoe. A hand, unmoving. A shriek of camera movement, as if dropped, then black. The film was only 3 minutes long, but it changed everything. It proved a second person had been there. It placed him near what could be the scene of the crime. It reinforced the theory that Franklin had not worked alone, and possibly had been an accomplice or passive enabler rather than the killer himself. The image of that unknown man was sent through facial recognition databases. Nothing. Not in criminal files, not in DMV records. He was a ghost, but a ghost with a face. The FBI created an age-progressed rendering and quietly circulated it. Tips came in, none panned out. But the film roll was no longer silent. It had become a weapon. In Sweden, the families were given a copy of the photograph, the best digital frame of the man's face. It wasn't justice, but it was something tangible. A target. A truth not fully known, but no longer fully hidden. Elizabeth Wallen, now elderly, held the image with trembling hands. "This is the man who took my daughter," she said. And in that moment, the story moved from mystery to mission. Investigators continued to dig. A new task force was formed. Archival records from nearby counties were re-examined. Other unsolved murders, previously thought unrelated, were now seen in a new light. The red car, the forest, the timeline, the pattern. Always the pattern. And then, in a stroke of poetic cruelty, the task force received a report from a hiker. Bones had been found near a dry riverbed just 20 kilometers from the original site. The remains were partial, weathered, old, but they belonged to a third victim, female, early 20s. Another traveler, another silence buried in soil. The case of Marie Lilienberg and Maria Wallin remains technically unsolved. No trial, no conviction, no final page, but their story, once buried under decades of dust and indifference, now breathes in the open. Their names live on in cold case databases, in criminal profiling seminars, in the aching memories of mothers and sisters. But more than that, their legacy warns. It warns of the illusion of safety, the mask of charm, the fragility of trust on long, open highways. And in that warning, in that echo, they endure. Not as victims, but as voices, silent no longer.